So what are you hoping to see with Bill Stout?
Well, I'm hoping for some production design that nobody's seen. It's not in any books. Maybe some grayscale designs. That's what I'm probably the most excited to see. Or like other stuff that they were designing that didn't end up happening, i.e. like a battle CAD or a ship or an adaptation of a ship or something from the toy line that went over into
another villain or something.
Or another villain.
Up a creaky set of stairs to like where his archives are. Again, shelves, drawers, boxes. What's in the box? So he opens a drawer and he says, I haven't really shown any of this stuff to anybody.
We're in the archive room of William Stout.
And what are we getting ready to check out?
We're about to dig into some flat boxes, some flat files, of production design from all of Masters of the Universe. And as far as I know, it hasn't been seen before. So he has this amazing treasure trove of all the design ideas of what went into developing the Masters of the Universe live action feature. So for me, as a fan of the subject matter and of filmmaking and of the process, I really love digging into that stuff because it demonstrates what the movie could have been. Not only what it could have been in terms of deleted characters or what have you, but also here are 7 or 8 different versions of how He-Man could have looked or Skeletor could have looked. It is seeing behind the curtain, it's seeing the nuts and bolts, but it's also seeing how awesome it could have been because that appealed to your taste more than what they ended up putting on screen or what the budget allowed them to put on screen.
One of the cool things when you start interviewing people and their connection to any of these brands, be it Turtles, Nintendo, or He-Man, is you never know their connection fully and what they might have from something that they worked on 30 years in the past. We walked into Charles Ambilis' studio and we thought, hey, maybe this is an interview. That's what we'll get. We'll get some great war stories and his opinion on what television animation history is like and really kind of give us a good full stroke of things. And then he brings out this box.
Nobody really knew that he had these cases and cases of designs. And he had saved some stuff from the earliest days of developing the He-Man show at Filmation. You know, it combines archaeology and detective work and journalism into this kind of boots on the ground documentary experience where we're able to experience that and then hopefully translate it to screen and bring it to all the people who also want to see it and experience it.
This idea of making a documentary like this and selling it anymore means you have to do it in a way that isn't just professional and it isn't just more complex. It has to bring something new. One of the areas that's really important to all three of us, but is less my skill set, if you're technical in nature and you look at our documentaries, you might be impressed because, we shoot more cinematic. We're shooting with cinema cameras and we're putting together particularly title sequences or transitional sequences that are graphically interesting.
Each of our films will have a certain look to them. What really drives it is the stuff that the cinematographer is working on for our title sequences that are driven by this, again, this feeling. For He-Man, it was the ink tank thing. And if you look closely, the subtlety in the poster and the motion graphics throughout the final film, there's kind of this ink element, this swirling thing, this mysterious thing that is always in the background. It's something that stays consistent. It's a motif, that's constant throughout the film. And it's very subtle, but it's the kind of thing, and I believe this about post-production and editing, it's the subtleties that make a consistency that if you, the watcher, don't notice, then we've done a good job.
You're talking about things like the plastic toy. Well, how do you show the plastic toy in an interesting way other than just to simply set it on a white background and that might be the style that suits that specific thing. And so we try to find thematic elements that we can bring into even the way we shoot just the toy sitting on a table. And in this case, we had already established during the Kickstarter campaign a 80s living room aesthetic where we would recapture some of those textural elements that were synonymous with late 70s and early 80s architecture, which is really the leftover 70s architecture that had aged out. And then you had brought in new technology like big wooden box televisions and stuff like that into, carpeted living rooms with wood panels. So you can feel right away that you're at the place where you likely were as a viewer playing with those toys in your living room or at grandma's house or whatever.
These sorts of things are done on purpose. Now, what do? I just conceptually say something. We should do this. And then I basically put it on Isaac to think about how he would do that. It's really easy for me to go, Well, we're taking an action figure apart. We should have one come back together somehow. I don't even know what that means. And then Isaac can go and make that happen. If you asked me to do that, would I have thought of putting a blown apart action figure in a fish tank with wires that comes together or blows air through and goes apart? No, I wouldn't have thought of any of these things. What I would have thought of is telling someone to come up with a way of doing it and then going back home and maybe having a coffee.
You can see on the screen here, we're rolling it so that I'm going to do it in reverse so the parts fly back on. So the head'll, in theory. We just put a He-Man toy in a fish tank and hollowed out his shoulders and legs and neck joining elements, and then put him underwater. And then rather than trying to bring the parts together, we blew the parts apart with compressed water, and then filmed it in high speed and reversed the footage, so you have this magical look where it comes back together.
It reminds me of an HBO ethereal feeling where we see these pieces of He-Man kind of come together, which is obviously a visual metaphor for the documentary in itself. You know, you'll see an arm float and come to this powerful torso, which is just like, you know, bringing people that worked on the toy line and having them connect to the cartoons, and everything kind of comes together in this almost magical way of the world itself.
In addition to that, we also did textural elements that Mark used in his graphical treatments, where he was marrying the CG elements that he was creating in the graphics and other elements that we shot on set, where we, again, using fish tanks and ink, created clouds and swirls. And then to have the He-Man element, which is very subtle, as we created a vacuum form plastic copy of the Castle Grayskull toy, but in clear plastic, put that submerged in water upside down, so that when we blasted the ink against the back of it, you could see the castle, but in this swirly magical way that we again shot in high speed, and it was really, really effective as a background texture tool that you wouldn't necessarily see front and center. It's just sort of in the, you know, subtle in the background.
You see, like, we're kind of traveling through a space, and you're seeing these little orbs or spheres that are different elements of the IP. Well, that's Mark's version of me saying another one of these stupid things. Well, maybe we could do, I don't know, travel through different worlds or whatever. And then he has to come up with a way of doing it, and then adds to the flip comment that I might make. So you see this process, this way of building these elements, these production value boosts. They require that there's a set of skills that come together in ways that can't be anticipated in advance or by themselves.
As these things are happening, and that's usually a drawn out process, shooting stuff, archiving stuff. In the meantime, Isaac's working usually on the long cut, the assembly cut, because he just has a knack for it, and he has a way of assembling all of those thoughts and things into a long, concise, thoughtful documentary.
Then that's where Mark can take that with the guidance of Rand through the whole process and try to connect these dots in more creative and interesting ways to make the stories have emotional resonance where needed, or tell specific technical things where needed, and guide a viewer through a story rather than just going, this happened, then this happened, then this happened, then this happened.
To me, it's about ebbs and flows, tension and release, pacing, emotion, and usually in the back of my head, and I won't say what it was for He-Man, I have some kind of subliminal metaphor. You know, not something that we're ever going to say, and I won't even say it now, but a subliminal metaphor that kind of evolves an image in my head that kind of creates itself through that process preceding going into the post-production.
It takes all of our skill sets combined to mold and craft all of these elements together into something that hopefully is a little bit more entertaining or interesting than just a biography of a brand.
If we cut according to paper, we would have a documentary that fulfills our plan. We can't have that. We have to have someone sit down and make a sort. This is how it's going to fit together, the rough assembly. And then I kick all the Jenga blocks over and say, move this, do that. And then it takes that person to go, oh, okay. And they see this new thing. And then out of the new thing comes this forward motion. I know what you're thinking. That's dialectics. You are correct.
It's a funny thing when you start making these films because you have an idea of what you want, especially as a fan like me, and you kind of hope to see what this final documentary is in your head before you start rolling. And then it's a whole nother actuality once you start executing and you start doing these interviews. What you get is not like, oh, here are the secrets behind the scenes of the show. What you actually end up getting is a collage of people that come from a lot of different backgrounds, that have a lot of disciplines, that just all have this one common point. And in this case, it's Masters of the Universe. As we started interviewing people, it really became clear that everybody was their own unique master.
I will be honest and say that I didn't think this franchise had as much in it as it did. And that's my fault. And realizing it, opening it up and getting inside, and something as simple as talking to Charles Zimbialis and spending time with him and just seeing the sheer amount of material, going to Mark Taylor's house and listening to his stories and doing that twice. And my son came with me, and we've stayed friends over the years. That kind of stuff is interesting. You see something in these people and in the franchise that you couldn't have imagined. You couldn't have predicted that any of these people would tell you the things that they tell you. And when they do, it's delightful. I mean, I read Barbara Hambley's book years ago, and then we're at Barbara Hambley's place, and she talked to us about sword fighting. She's a sword fighter. And if you met her, you maybe wouldn't assume that. We went to Larry DiTilio's house, and he has a games collection that would blow your mind. This happens again and again and again and again. Mike Barbato pulls out Snout Spout. Martin Ariola pulls out little figures that he designed. It just goes in an area that you can't have anticipated. It creates a depth where I hadn't anticipated it. And the behind the scenes here is grappling with that. It's understanding that, this depth is going to be here no matter what we talk about. We could do a documentary on anything, and we're always going to have this. And that's what this is about, is the realization of that. A kid sitting at home is going to say, I liked He-Man. It was interesting. It was cool. He grows up. I liked He-Man. It was interesting. It was cool. And he watches this documentary and he says, oh, Mark Taylor's a person. He had these ideas. He had this approach. He had this thing up on his wall. Somebody walked through his office and said, let's try that. Let's call it He-Man. Let's make a comic. You just keep going down this branching adventure. You're picking a path, and it keeps being impossible and impossible and impossible. And at the end, it all makes sense when you look backwards. And we get to kind of reproduce that process.